If the entity it would have to give you something that you would be able to put your trust in. I mean, no, I know, definitely be critical. I'm not saying don't be critical. I'm not saying like accept the first thing that comes along and says it's your holy guardian angel. Certainly, it all depends how much it takes for you to put your trust in that entity. I mean, for me, I thought about this with my angel for a long time before I finally like got to trust it. And even then, we had like a number of experiences where I'll like try to make it prove itself or whatever, just because I don't always know, just because I get an intuition or an impulse, and it's like, oh, this is coming from your angel. It's like, well, is it? Like, prove it to me.
Well, as far as the Holy Guardian Angel is concerned, Crowley considered it his true will formula to teach the next step, which was to attain the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. So that sort of says to me that it's an important part of the evolutionary process for people as well. So it's not just a matter of sort of like you want to get something and you want to, you know.
Yeah, it's different than the whole sort of like goetic elemental type experience, or even like when you're praying to an angel to be healed or enlightened or whatever. I mean, yeah, it's a completely different thing. It's like, what am I for? Like, we are all tools of some kind. We're here to do something. That's sort of like the fundamental philosophical underpinning of Thelema, is we're here to do shit. The world should be a different place because we were alive. Like, if the world is the same after we die that it was when we were born, then our existence is meaningless. That's what it says in Liberal. Like, when it's talking about, you know, the people who sorrows are shadows that pass and are done, and these people are like, have no impact on reality. It's almost like they're not existing at all, and he kind of identifies them as non-entities. And a lot of the book, because there's a few things in Liberal that are direct quotes from the Book of Revelations, which contains within it the idea that there's a limited number of people. Well, the way it gets portrayed in certain religions is there's a limited number of people who get into heaven, the 144,000 or whatever. But if you look at John Dee's Enochian work, what's strongly implied, and actually it's not really directly said by the angels, but there's one point where they kind of say to him, there's no more human beings in the world that there ever were from the beginning of time to the end. There's always the same number of people. What's implied there is that there are only certain people who are real. And what I would define, in my own interpretation of that, what I would define that as is these are the people who actually have an impact on the reality. They change, things are not the same because they existed. And that's what moves everything forward, i.e. toward the end, although I don't think the end is really a thing, but that's, again, my interpretation.
Okay. Could a spirit contact you because you had a connection with it in a past life, maybe?
That's possible. That's really hard to verify, you know, and it all depends like how much past life work a person has. One of the things that I do say, though, I mean, it wouldn't even have to be a past life necessarily. Like, if you fuck with these things at any point in your life, you're fucking with them for your whole life. They exist outside of time. That's pretty clear in everyone's interpretation. Mm-hmm. So they have no concept of, they can fuck with you when you're a kid and fuck with you later or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter.
Or even if you've never had previous contact with them, maybe it's like when you take that allegory of the stranger, maybe that stranger at the subway looks or acts a certain way that draws your attention to them.
It's
without
possible.
Them consciously meaning to.
As long as, like, all I would say about that is it's really important to be very critical of these experiences when they appear to be happening, and not just not to take stuff and run with it. That's the big thing, because I feel like, you know, I've talked to certain people, particularly when it comes to Goetia, and they'll talk about, you know, like, well, this spirit contacted me and blah blah blah, and it's like, well, again, this comes back to success is your proof. If the person is producing something interesting, it seems to be creating something interesting and doing interesting things, and not just like apparently delusional, you know, then yeah, great. I mean, if they're doing shit with it, great. If it's producing something, amazing. But if it's not producing anything, then you've got to wonder what's actually going on. Is this just a story you came up with to make yourself more interesting, or what? And that's what all of this comes down to. Is the major question has to be, like, if you're doing this ritual, if you're doing the invocation of the Bornless One, what are you using it for? Like, what is it to do? It isn't really a thing. It can be a thing in and of itself, but essentially, if you're just doing it to do the ritual, you have just asserted your spiritual authority over all the phenomenal existing universe. And then you just, pack it in and go home? Like theoretically, I would assume that you would be doing something with that authority and with that power.
So with that, on that note, you mentioned before that it's important to be doing it on a regular basis, but in this case, it's sort of obviously the emphasis is on, well, you need a goal, you need some
Absolutely.
purpose behind it. So how would you consolidate that, or how would you recommend consolidating?
Well, I think if you're doing it on a regular basis, it should be part of some kind of larger structure of a ritual. I mean, one possible goal can just be to get it down so you know it. I mean, and there is sort of a tendency to want to be able to do a ritual like perfectly the first time you pick it up because it's such a big deal to do it and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, no one does that. I mean, that's like expecting to like be able to pick up a guitar and play Freebird like just like that. And if I mess up a note, then I don't want to play guitar anymore. It's like, no one does that. You got to practice something for a long time. So yeah, I mean that's one of the things. To get closer to one's holy guardian angel is certainly a worthy goal. I would say. I had been doing this ritual probably for about 4 years before I felt like I actually got it right. That I was capable of doing it without a break in concentration at any time. Totally focused, totally inflamed in it. And even now, it's like there are times I get it right, there are times I don't. I get distracted now and then, or whatever. It's like, there's no quick fix to this, really. Like, it's got to be regular and repetitive to a certain degree.
I think that's comparable to musicianship as well, because it's like you don't get the song perfected and then 3 years later expect to be able to perform it perfectly again without any...
That's the big problem with when people get a success and they put it down or whatever.
So would you recommend like doing this like every day for a month or 6 months?
Well, definitely like... When I first started, I did it every day for a month and saw what happened. And like it's important to keep the journal and record like any phenomena that might accompany it or whatever. But I mean, realistically, for anyone who hasn't had knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, well, that should be the fundamental goal that everyone has when they're doing ceremonial magic. Simply because like before you have that, there's a reason that the Outer College of the AA isn't really invested too much in like creating new things and stuff like that. So you learn this exercise, you learn that exercise, you learn how to do talismans, you learn how to scry, you learn divination over here, and when you get over here you get more into yoga and so on and so forth, because that's all like a preparation for knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. And until you have that, what's the metaphor Curly uses? He's like, if you're not on the right path, then you don't know what the direction that you're going is. So if you charge off and start trying to do stuff on a magical level, then you could just be taking many steps in the wrong direction without the guidance of your angel. And that's very easy to do, and especially because it's very hard for us to know when we're being influenced by external forces and when we're actually following our true will.
So like, what if we awaken like Kundalini kind of like unwittingly kind of thing? Would that like give us greater contact to the Holy Guardian Angel?
Well, Liber 65, Crowley's book about the Holy Guardian Angel, begins with an invocation of Kundalini. That's the first passage. So yeah, I would say that's relevant. And that actually comes up quite a bit in his rubric for the Bornless Ritual. I mean, it's part of the reason that I use it whenever as a precursor to the Bornless Ritual. Like, the heart girt with serpent is kind of how this ritual concludes. And there's a reason that it's written out that way. And there's a reason that this image comes up constantly in Crowley's work. And that's the first words of Liber 65 are, I am the heart, the snake is entwined, which is actually the end of the Bornless Ritual. So yeah, there's a lot of harmony there. Yes?
So is the Holy Guardian Angel a similar concept to the fetch in tradition? Do you know what? Is it?
The origin of the Holy Guardian Angel concept comes from a book called The Sacred Magic of Abramelin, which essentially comes from Hebrew tradition, where it was, you could only teach the Kabbalah to the firstborn son, and this guy was an older rabbi who was also into ceremonial magic. He wanted his second son to have an access to that same knowledge. So he wrote the book as a way of, this is how you can get sort of the same result without actually teaching you Kabbalah, because it's against the rules, basically. And Crowley kind of took that book and expanded it, and then he added the invocation of the Bornless one as sort of, this is how I did this, basically. But the idea is that the Holy Guardian Angel is a separate entity that's objective and yet somehow has some kind of essential connection to us as an individual person who's capable of telling us, like, this is where you're supposed to be going, this is what you're supposed to be doing, and so on.
Do we each have our own Holy Guardian Angel? Or is it
That's the idea, yes. For every individual, there's supposed to be a unique and separate. And that's where it gets confused. Sorry, just to finish this thought. There's times that Crowley will refer to it, he uses a Greek term that means higher self, which I don't know how to pronounce, so I'm not going to try. And
The Algoides one, yeah.
I don't want to embarrass myself. Yeah, so that gets conflated a lot with people thinking, oh, okay, it's really just my higher self. It's really me, but just on a different level. And there's a point where that gets confused. So in Magic Without Tears, he's really specific about, no, it's a separate, objective, completely different entity. And that's the only way that it can produce real struggle, because if what we're struggling against when we do this ritual, at the height of this ritual, is really just part of us, then it's not a real struggle. It's sort of a self-understanding or self-awareness or self-becoming, whatever you want to call it.
Is the Holy Guardian Angel specifically part of Thelema, or does it exist?
No, it's pre-existing to Thelema. However, Thelema was created by Crowley's Guardian Angel. I mean, when he had his Holy Guardian Angel experiences, when he got the Book of the Law, and they announced, okay, this is the new Aeon, it is now the Aeon of Horus, and blah, blah, blah. So that's why we use Crowley's HGA in rituals in Thelema, as well as our own, because he's supposed to be like the minister who brings in the new Aeon. So yeah, it's all connected in that sense. But yeah, like that form of magic pre-exists Thelema, pre-exists the Golden Dawn. They just used that a lot, and it was heavily used in the structuring of the formula of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn when they were putting that together. So,